Hi everyone, I have a super cool deck to show you today. This is something I've been working on since M20 came out, and I like to call it Bant Flash Wolves. So, at its heart, this is kind of a tempo, kind of rampy type of deck, where basically we want to do a little bit of ramping early on, and then just respond to whatever our opponent does. I think the main reason why this deck is so fun to play is because it's very interactive, so that when you do end up winning, it feels like you've outplayed them. So for the ramp package, we're playing 4 Incubation Druid, 4 Paradise Druid, and 4 Growth Spiral. The best of these ramp cards, I would say, is probably Paradise Druid, and that's just because it has hexproof when it's untapped, so it's pretty hard to kill early on. The next best one I would say is Growth Spiral. It's very good, that is an instant speed card. However, sometimes this might not actually ramp you because you do need to have 3 or 4 lands in order to actually get to 4 mana when you're using this as your ramp card, and sometimes you just don't draw enough lands. And then Incubation Druid here. This one, it's a little bit easy to kill, being a 0/2. However, having this adaptability is very relevant because it can turn into a threat later on in the game. It can add a bunch of mana for your Hydroid Krasis to make it super huge, and you can adapt at instant speed, and this deck is trying to do everything that it can on your opponent's turn, so this actually does matter a lot of the time. Something you might have noticed is that even though this is a ramp deck, there are 0 Llanowar Elves, and I think Llanowar Elves doesn't fit very well into this deck. The reason being that it's very good at ramping you from 1 to 3 mana. However, we're playing 0/3 drops. We really want to get from 3 to 4 mana on turn 3. So Llanowar Elves isn't really helping with that. Also, because it's a 1-drop that we have to play at sorcery speed, it can lead to some awkward turns when playing Growth Spiral, because ideally we want to leave up Growth Spiral to play on our opponent's turn on turn 2, because if we leave our mana open, we could be possibly playing a Negate or a Blink of an Eye. That's something that our opponent has to consider then if we have the mana open. However, if we're playing Llanowar Elves, then when we play Growth Spiral, we might draw a Llanowar Elf, and then it feels bad because we could have played that on our turn if we had played Growth Spiral during our main phase. So, instead of Llanowar Elves, we've got Opt here as our 1-drop. It's very important that it's an instant speed thing that we can play with just 1 mana, and it can help to smooth out a lot of our draws. As far as the rest of the instants and sorceries in the deck, it's just the Negate and the Blink of an Eye. Next up, in the 4-drop slot, we've got these 2 creatures, and these are really the entire reason for playing the deck. First one, Nightpack Ambusher. This is a new card. It's a 4/4 Flash Wolf for 4 mana, and at the beginning of each of our end steps, if we didn't cast a spell, create a 2/2 green wolf creature token. I think this card is being a little bit overlooked right now. It's a very powerful threat, and if it stays on the board, we don't actually need to cast any spells for the rest of the game because it just continually keeps generating value. Notably though, because these both cost 4 mana, it means that our opponent always has to be considering whether we have both of these cards if we leave 4 mana open on their turn. So the plan A is to play Nightpack Ambusher, and then just have that stay in play and generate value for the rest of the game. Plan B is to play Frilled Mystic if they play a spell that we don't want to resolve, like say a Teferi or something. We can play Frilled Mystic, counter their spell, and then when we get a chance, play Nightpack Ambusher and keep leaving up 4 mana to play a Frilled Mystic or a Negate or a Blink of an Eye. At the very top of the curve here, we've got Dream Eater. This is a card that did see a little bit of play when it was new, but doesn't so much anymore, but I think it fits really well in this deck. It's another flash threat that has flying, so we can play this on our opponent's turn when they don't expect it, and then hit them for 4 on our turn. However, since this is a Bant deck, it doesn't really have that much removal, and we have to rely on things like bounce effects to remove permanents that are causing trouble for us. And Dream Eater can do exactly that, while also fixing our next 4 draws and putting a pretty big clock in play. We also have 2 other creatures that don't have flash. They are Hydroid Krasis and Tolsimir. This deck is a little bit weak to aggro because it needs to get to 4 mana to really get going, and aggressive decks can potentially kill our Paradise Druid or Incubation Druid. So with Tolsimir here, it allows us to try and get back the tempo that we might have lost if one of our ramp creatures has died. We can put this out, get 2 creatures in play, gain some life, and also fight one of opponent's creatures. Also, there's a lot of synergy between Tolsimir and Nightpack Ambusher. If we have both of these in play and Nightpack Ambusher triggers, then every turn we're getting to trigger Tolsimir, gain 3 life, and fight an opponent's creature. And as far as Hydroid Krasis, since this is a ramp deck, we want to be playing Krasis to draw a bunch of cards and put a big fat flyer in play, and also gain us some life. There are only 3 of these and not 4. That's because ideally you'll be able to win without having to cast a Krasis, but when you want one, it helps a lot, but you don't actually always want one. So only seeing one in a typical game is ideal. Also, a nice little synergy that I didn't mention before is with Blink of an Eye. You can actually use this to bounce Frilled Mystic back to your hand and then replay it as another counterspell. And that's just another line of play that your opponent might have to play around at some point. You can see with all of these synergies and things happening at flash speed, it really makes the game hard for your opponent to play because if you leave mana open, there's just so many different things that you can be doing at any point in the game. An argument that I've seen to playing this type of deck is that the 3 mana Teferi just shuts it down, and there is some truth to that, but I really don't think that Teferi just defeats this deck or that its existence is enough of a reason to not play a deck like this, because especially if you're on the play, you can negate a Teferi, or you could ramp into a Frilled Mystic and counter the Teferi that way. You could respond to the Teferi by playing Nightpack Ambusher, and if they bounce it, then maybe you have a Paradise Druid in play that you can finish off the Teferi with. You could also Blink of an Eye at the Teferi, and then that will give you the opportunity to counter it. Or maybe your opponent just isn't playing Teferi because not every deck plays it. As far as the lands go, it's really a blue-green deck with a very light white splash. There would be 4 Breeding Pools and 4 Hinterland Harbors. There are 3 and 3 here, but ideally you would have 4 and 4. You could play some number of Temple of Mystery, but I think it's not really necessary. If you really want to get a scry, then go ahead and play them. But personally, I think it's better to make sure that your lands come into play untapped whenever possible. For the white sources, there are just 2 Temple Gardens and 2 Hallowed Fountains, and that's because with these 4, as well as the 4 Paradise Druids, usually that's enough white sources to be able to play your Tolsimirs, which are the only white cards in the deck, and you'll only need 1 white mana for this. The rest of the lands are just 7 forests and 7 islands. This would be 6 and 6 if you've got the full playset of Breeding Pools and Hinterland Harbors. And overall, I think this deck has performed pretty well so far against all of the tier 1 decks that exist right now. It seems like it can put up a fight against pretty much anything. It's a little bit weak to aggro, but if you can weather the early storm and land a Tolsimir, or get a Nightpack Ambusher that'll start generating blockers for you every turn, you can win the aggro matchup. Against control, just worry about avoiding the 3 mana Teferi or countering it, and you'll be okay. And this might not be the perfect build of the deck, but I think it's a pretty solid foundation, and just being able to play these 2 cards both at 4 mana is, I think, something very powerful. I've been playing this just in best of 1 so far, but I think it might actually be a better best of 3 deck just because it is so interactive, and when you get access to a sideboard, you can bring in a lot of cards to help shore up the weaknesses. Say against aggro, you might want to consider something like Arboreal Grazer or maybe Pulse of Marasa. But let me know what you think of this deck. I think it's super fun. I'm going to keep working on it and playing it. And if you've got any suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comments. Thanks for watching.